to have like a more up-to-date sense of what's going on than the article. Maybe we can start with you, Ben, and then pass it down, Jenna, and then me, and so on. Take it away, Ben.
Sure. Can you hear me? This is a different setup than one I use. I'm actually traveling right now. So I don't have a great narrative for what happened because I wasn't super deeply involved in this. So when I would say this immediately reminded me of what is called 3-pool, which I just put a link to. That I've got to put some price links and some connect with this link. And 3-pool, and now the article mentions 3-pool has $4 billion in liquidity. Right now, it's got about 200 million. So it's fallen a long way, but it's still significant. 3-pool is extremely interesting to me, and I think it's actually one of the most interesting objects in the whole space, in that you have these 3 very liquid USD stablecoins, and they're all paired off against each other. And if you go to the page, and there's a price chart that's not actually important, go down to currency reserves. Right now, DAI has like 85 million, USDC 87, and USDT 37. And you can see the percentages. This is actually a really good sort of real-time live barometer of what the various sort of pressures on the different stablecoins are. Right now, USDT is actually the lowest, which means it's actually in the most demand. I feel like one of these days where I'm going to have to share all my conspiracy theories with USDT, and everyone has their own conspiracy theories, and I think it could make a very interesting discussion, but that for another day. I could spend the whole hour talking about that. But, every time anyone says, oh, something bad's going on or something's happening, just check this page and you can immediately see, hey, is one of the stable coins, like if it's way out of proportion, that means that it's either undervalued or overvalued. When USDC broke the peg earlier, I think late last year or mid last year, it ballooned in 3-pool. In fact, when it broke the peg on 3-pool. So it's and because this is sort of trustless and permissionless, it's very interesting. So when I read this article, I immediately think of 3-pool. Now, obviously, the article is more about how curve finance was set up, and I didn't want to mention this. I know Venkat has talked about, I think this comes from Stratechery, where everything is about unbundling and rebundling. And you can, and I think Venkat's talking about protocolization and deprotocolization. I feel like in a lot of DeFi, this stuff, it's about staking and rehypothecating. So you find ways to lock things up, and you find ways to free the things you just locked up. And it comes down to the fact that, the incentives, you have to have some kind of cost for a lot of times doing things. But users want to be able to move. They don't want to be locked. So you end up with this sort of loop where people are trying to lock things up, and then people are trying to unlock the things they just locked, and it's, I don't know, I find it kind of humorous. But yeah, I can't like wrap up this narrative in a very and this is what happened. But just looking at the price charts, it looks like, curve still exists, the 3-pool still exists, convex still exists. So whatever they're doing is still being done. I'm not so sure about, I'll have to look up like the other things like the wrapped curve still exists. But I want to, I don't have time right now to check the price of, the liquid provided curve, staked curve versus the price of curve itself, and how much those have split in terms of, price. But this is, I think what ended up happening here was that, if I wanted to try to narrativize the whole thing, is that because there was a lot of, slosh, a lot of stuff flowing around the space, and people wanted to capture that, and then people wanted to, capture the capturing, and that's how you ended up with this Russian nesting dolls of various protocols all trying to capture each other. And I think what happened is the UST collapsed, and then it sucked a lot of the liquidity out of the space, and then things. I don't want to say it stopped, because clearly this stuff keeps going, but it's like the froth was sucked out. Like, you look at the price charts, it's like you can often see the and then you see the UST collapse, Luna collapse, and then it's like, all right, everything's a lot more muted. And yeah, not sure I have too much more to say on this, except I do think these kind of things are interesting. Even if the prices go down, things dampen. Sort of like you create some incentives, and then people. The idea of incentives is to incentivize people to do things, but as a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And this is just it playing out again and again and again. And ultimately, I don't think that means incentivizing people is pointless. You can never do that. It's more of you have to be careful about what you're doing. You have to think through, try to play many moves ahead. But also, I mean, there's a question: is this sort of thing really bad? Obviously, I would say it's bad if, like, Terra Luna, it does create, a systemic risk that eventually implodes. But I'm not sure Convex was actually doing that. I mean, you can imagine Curve exists and wants to, have their Curve open for governance. And, this is all just sort of building on top of that to try to make that actually usable. So instead of thinking of like Convex as fighting with Curve, it's more like Convex is the governance module Curve never actually got around to building. And then on top of that, there was, other sort of, I would even go as far as to say maybe political parties fighting in this arena that has been grown from the top of this Curve token. So I find this fascinating. So I think I've blabbled on enough. I think we're heading, is it down to Jenna?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah. I can be super short because obviously most of this, I feel this way when I try to read like the real finance pages on the Wall Street Journal. That what might have been you, Venkat. Somebody I read recently talked about how all of this stuff needs to get to where it's okay if you don't understand exactly how it all works, that it's safe for normies to participate. And so we're looking for that inflection point to come here. The other thing that I'll go try to find it, but I came across a term last week that I wanted to hold on to, that, the finance industry itself, like all the money guys, have for a long time tried to figure out how to use, you have inside knowledge, and how do you behave responsibly with that knowledge? Because you can't unknow it for your own decisions. And there was a clever term that I hadn't come across before that as I say, I'll try to go find it. But it feels like all the gamifying, the degen part of the crypto world is at that point where the legit players know enough that they will constantly be tempted to rug pull somebody else or whatever else it is. And so dividing the legit uses of what you know and the not legit uses is just an ongoing space, I think, of interest for us all. I think that's my main takeaways. Oh, and then of course I've been following Nat for a long time, just because he's like good at the internet, a young dude, very clever at jumping on what's next. And he jumped on wrote there for a while, I think, to get his visibility up in this space, and then jumped to writing his book. And he's one of the people I see who has definitely not left Twitter. I just went and looked at his page. He's pumping the book. So just if you're looking for people who are good at this shit, he's one of them, I guess. And I think he's legit, though. Of course, I'd be interested if anybody else is following him closely enough to have a sense of where he is on the trustworthy spectrum. Back onto you, Venkat.
Yeah, this somebody shared it with me on Farcaster a while ago when I was musing about some of this stuff. But the degen side of crypto is one that I think I pay the least attention to, because pure yield farming is like fundamentally intellectually uninteresting, and I think it's for the same reason that I don't pay too much attention to Wall Street either. But definitely, I think even though I find the people on average slightly more distasteful than people in like I don't know, other parts of society, I do think they're an important part of the ecosystem, and they serve like an actual function. Like the sort of headline on all this activity, whether it's TradFi or DeFi, is that they act as the destruction part of the creative destruction cycle, where they squeeze every last bit of information out of the financial sector and exploit any inefficiency, including in negative ways by destroying inefficient or poorly managed things. So hedge funds are based on this. Generally, short selling is based on this. Any kind of like leverage stack of derivatives is based on this. And I think Matt Levine in his newsletter often says, crypto often reinvents things that have been happening in traditional finance. And sometimes it sort of reinvents in like a very naive way, but other times it actually comes up with innovations that forces like traditional finance people to do a double take and maybe, introduce better ways of doing stuff. So as far as this kind of activity goes, which is you've got like a base, relatively simple to understand activity going on, but it's perhaps too simple in relation to the phenomenon it's trying to sort of manage. So in this case, you've got multiple stable coins that need a liquidity relative to each other. And that's sort of like mechanism design engineering problem with a certain complexity. And clearly one way to look at this is that having the single layer sort of like mechanism, which is curve, is just not enough. The system is way too complex. There's way more levels of optimization to be done. And then along come players like Convex and others. So in this article, it looks like there were 3 or 4 layers. And you've got the whole stack. And at the end, where, I don't know, Llama or whatever the hell they were talking about as the last layer, maybe that's the level at which you're finally like, your governance mechanism is as complex as the thing being governed. I think that's the endpoint such systems try to evolve to in the best case. So I don't know, I'm thinking of this as like a first principles engineering thing, right? There's a lot of principles like Ashby's law of variety and similar systems as theory principles that say that the dimensionality of a system trying to control another system has to match it. So if you have like 100-dimensional thing, you need 100-dimensional governance or control mechanism to control it. So you can't do like, you can't control very complex things with very simple control mechanisms. So that's kind of my basic presumption in analyzing something like this. But in practice, what happens is that the complexity of governance, I think, comprises 2 things. One is actual complexity required to govern it, and the other is like fragility building, over leverage and scams and things that maybe don't need to exist. So both, I don't think you can have one without the other. So you will have like the complexity required to govern the thing, as well as the complexity that causes fragility due to like poor management of like systemic debt. And when you're doing things like, say, controlling an airplane, so like I use, I guess, aerospace examples a lot, but you take like a modern airliner, like, Boeing or something, in general, most of the complexity is there to improve operations, efficiency, safety, things like that. So 90% of the reason that a modern Boeing or Airbus is so much more complex than a Wright Flyer is for good reasons. It's like reflecting actual complexity in the problem of flying. Maybe some small percentage is poor risk management, like, the Boeing MCAS system, that was like very poor risk management that introduced fragility for like financial or profit-making reasons, and it led to crashes and people died. So that's airliners. And if you look at another end of the spectrum, modern rockets are equally complex or more complex in many areas, like, compressors run much faster in rockets than in airplanes. And their rockets blow up a lot more because they're trying to do a much more difficult engineering task, which is get to outer space, lifting loads. So, but we accept that. We accept that space exploration is fundamentally more risky. So given the same amount of complexity, we accept that things are going to blow up more often. And in that case, I think there's a proper social contract around it. Unlike in, say, Wall Street finance or crypto, the people involved in rocketry kind of largely have a social and cultural consensus that it's okay for things to blow up once in a while, which I'm not sure is true of like finance. So the point of this is think there's like a fundamentals way of analyzing this stuff, and I don't yet know how to think about it. Like, are crypto and also Wall Street, for that matter, are they more like rockets or are they more like airliners? Do we want them to be extremely safe with like 1 in a trillion kind of like safety incidents happening, or do we want them to be relatively risky and blow up as often as like rockets do? I don't know how to think about that. And the other thing I don't know how to think about is what's the, I don't know, optimal level of like, how do I put it, like profiteering malice. Like, I think actually you don't want that level to be zero. You want a certain non-zero percentage of players in the system to be out for sheer profit, including through like completely like fraudulent means, because they almost act as like forcing function that forces the system to be more secure. So you do want some scammers in the system. And this is true in any engineered system. Like something like Boeing, maybe you do want at least a few top executives out to make shareholder profits rather than safer airplanes. But how much is optimal? Do you want like 1 in 100 senior people to be scammers or 5 in 100? I don't know what the right level is, but it does seem like crypto and stable coins in general have seen maybe more than their share of, I don't know, leverage and debt and fragility creating scammers at the top. So you had all those stablecoin collapses starting with like Terra Luna. I think we read about that at some point. Maybe it needs to get more towards the safety end of the spectrum. I'm not sure how to think about it, but it looks like from what I could Google, 2024, even though all this has died down a bit, people are still super bullish. There's also the central bank stable coins coming online slowly. There's a lot of regulation in the pipeline, looks like. So I think this stays very important, but I think it's going to get more like airliners and less like rockets. That's kind of my overall take. But passing on to Anant.
Oh, thank you. I previously only superficially had an understanding of what Curve was doing, but reading this article was helpful to understand the sort of, apart from the stable swap, it seems to be more efficient as compared to, say, the sort of Uniswap style, just a constant product. Like a constant function, I guess, market making protocol. That's the token economics surrounding it was very interesting, which I sort of learned. I thought that was interesting. I mean, I was trying to think of like an analogy of like between the Uniswap pools and the Curve pools, and it's sort of maybe it's the word pools, but it sort of maybe think of like the pools as being like some sort of viscous fluid, where like the Uniswap is like a very very low viscosity. So if you have like huge volumes of trading pairs doing something with like exchanging hands, then because it's like sort of like a deformation, like a huge deformation as compared to like a highly viscous fluid where the sort of deformation is slightly more localized. That seems to be like difference between the Curve pools and Uniswap pools. I thought that was interesting to note, and also, like I said, sort of the token economics surrounding that was built on top was interesting with all voting escrowed CRV tokens that allowed people to vote for protocol rewards for different pools. And from there on, the whole convex finance, and then the sort of a layer on top, it's like redacted, I think, with their tokens was felt like, I mean, when I sort of try to look at new mechanisms, I always start from, or at least try to think of like why not, not why. But in this case, it felt like why in some cases. Specifically, it felt like some sort of like a Mandelbrot, like set where it just could be like an infinite loop of governance tokens, each optimizing each other for some sort of protocol reward maximization and control over, I guess, protocol rewards. I was also reminded of this, like, it struck me like there's a company called Anthropology that they do like automated optimization for 3D printing, and they sort of made this really complex manifold like neat exchanger type structure, which really cool because the computer sort of created this that based on some genetic algorithm, but it didn't serve any practical purpose apart from just being a cool engineering artifact. So it didn't feel like this. At the end of this reading, going at the end of this article, it felt like that. While it sounded as interesting and sort of novel, while going more and more into it, it sort of, especially with the whole bribing economy and such, felt like why in some sense, and it felt like without like proper utility for these tokens, it's just like a different kind of casino. And also with the whole, especially with the point that Venkat was making, I was reminded of like the I was reading like this Noam Chomsky's book, and like one of the stats he quotes in that book, the Democracy, the Delhi Lectures book, was like about, this was I think some 20 years ago. Maybe the numbers has changed now, but at least one thing that struck in my head was like about over 90%, less than 95%, I think, was all financial transactions in the world is speculative transactions. It's just like it's non-productive transactions, and he sort of questions if that number should be that high. He concedes that it's kind of necessary, but he seemed to think, at least from my recollection, that it's not healthy to have such a really high number of just like speculative transactions. So this sort of reading this article kind of sort of reminded me of that about the crypto ecosystem. On like at what level is it healthy to have such speculative instruments? But yeah, I'll stop there. I'll pass it on to Anuraj.
Yeah, I didn't read much of the article. Not much to say.
Oh, why didn't you read it? Got bored with it?
No, like I was setting up the stream and then yeah, then I was just listening in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a topic worth tracking, but I'm not entirely sure how to track it because obviously I don't have any need to suddenly trade large volumes of stable coins and things like that, nor do I have any interest in like actually uh, speculating on the governance tokens of such liquidity pool things. So my exposure to like all crypto DeFi stuff is like occasionally using Uniswap at most. So actually, I don't know what, I haven't done that in like more than a year. So I actually don't know what the current best practice is for retail level DeFi trades, if any. So that's worth looking into. But I think this is kind of like worth tracking, same as like, we track Wall Street news for booms and busts, except I don't have strong instincts on how to interpret anything that happens in this space. Anyway, yeah, floor open for more comments.
What are the applications? Like, where are these liquidity pools used?
I think to trade large amounts of stablecoins. So if you want to trade like $1 million worth of USDC for $1 million worth of DAI, where are you going to go do it? I assume that's where people go to do this.
Yeah, I would say it's that, and well, for like something more like Uniswap or aggregators like CowSwap, it's more like there's trading large volumes of stables. There's also just buying meme tokens and using that as sort of a way to gamble. So I would say those are, I think, the two biggest uses. I'd have to actually do some research to look at volume numbers. As for how I handle this, I mean, I don't trade very much either, so I think I've used CowSwap like a couple of times. But I do have Curve 3 Pool bookmarked, and every once in a while I check it. Anytime there's news that something is happening in the crypto space, like, ooh, a thing is blowing up, I always check it. So I consider it sort of like a health gauge for the three primary stablecoins. And I'm sure you could, look at some other pools and use those to like check individual, healths of various things, if you cared. That's just how I use it.
So one quick reaction I posted already to what Anand said. The Noam Chomsky line of thought of 90% of transactions are like unproductive speculation. I think that's a bullshit number. It's very similar to the claim that 90% of the brain is unused or 90% of DNA is junk DNA. You poke a little, you realize that's basically bullshit. Like, it's only unproductive if you kind of have this, I don't know, object level communist view of economics as the only kind of like transaction that's value creating is when money changes hands for like an actual literal good or service. I think if you actually understand this right, it's these layers are needed to do rational allocation in an economy. And even though some of it might look very unproductive from the point of view of like socialist polemics, they're kind of like part of the computation algorithm that the market as a distributed computer is running. Like if you want efficient allocation of like materials and services at the lowest level, but across the world and in huge marketplaces of like millions of products and substitution possibilities, then you do need all these layers. So it's not that 90% is speculative bullshit. It's just got a very illegible relationship to underlying material value flows. So I'm kind of very skeptical of, I don't know, ideologically driven claims of that sort. And then you have these, each time there's like a blow up or a meltdown in the financial markets, you've always got these crusading holy warriors going after like the entire sector as this is all unproductive bullshit and let's go back to gold and ends up being the like naive end game of it. So yeah, like, you know, when you had the financial crisis in 2008, yes, there were definitely over leveraged people pulling scams on the housing market, and it was right to like create regulation to police them, and some of them did get away scot-free. But the fact that the housing scam happened is not evidence of the theory that 90% of transactions and financialization are bullshit speculation. It's just not true. Like mathematically and economically, they actually serve functions. So that tends to be my bias. Like financialization is one of those like words like neoliberalism or capitalism that people use as just a scare word, and it doesn't mean what people think it means. It's not like, I don't know, parasites sucking 90% of the value out of stuff. So this probably bears thinking about more. Maybe we should read something about it. But yeah, I would summarize it as financialization is kind of basically good, even though it's exploited for scams like most things. More thoughts?
Helpful. I couldn't really fact check that number anywhere outside of the book that I was reading. It was helpful. Thank you.
I have heard other people making similar claims. That's why I sort of took it more broadly. Like throughout the whole subprime crisis 2008 or so, that sort of argument was extremely common, where people just used the word financialization as like a generally, I don't know, scary boogeyman suitcase word that they never actually bothered to unpack. Like you had like lots of explainers on how the subprime mortgage itself actually worked, like the credit default swaps and all those things. And people used all those terms without understanding them, like they were all, I don't know, evil criminal things. And this is, again, just not true. Like credit default swaps happen even today. Like there's just a universe of instruments that can be used expertly or inexpertly and for good or bad. And financialization is like any other kind of engineering. It produces a vast number of mechanisms and technologies that create its own like engineering economy, I guess. How do I put it? Like, in a way, some of these arguments about financialization seem not even wrong. Like if you had like maybe somebody who doesn't understand anything about mechanical engineering saying something like using nuts and bolts is wrong or evil, it sounds to me like that kind of argument. Like a credit default swap is simply like a mechanism for doing certain things that move things around. Just like, nut and bolt is like a mechanism for like joining two parts together. It's not good or bad. It depends on how it's used and who's using it and how expertly, right? So that's kind of something I think as a culture, at least in the US, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in the US, there's almost like a cultural suspicion of this as like some evil black magic that needs to be policed like witchcraft. And then people who do things you don't understand should be burned at the stake. There's that attitude towards it. And definitely some of the people involved deserve it. But the technology on the whole is, I don't know, just another complex technology that if you're interested in, you have to go in and master.
I personally would agree with a lot of that. But I'd make a stronger analogy to like politics. So I think a lot of finance is just politics in a different form, the way war is politics in a different form. And of course, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. But I mean, it is, if you've got humans running around doing human things, it's going to be inevitable. And I also agree with the Venkati and the take that technology is not as controllable. I tend to go even farther and say, like, societies are not as controllable as people, like critics, want to believe.
Yeah, that's definitely true. People want the illusion of the world being way more in control and governed than it actually is. Like along almost every dimension, people want to believe.
But
Yeah,
if
yeah.
enough
I
people
mean,
believe, then it does have its effect on the world, right?
Yeah, like the fact of belief, just like religion, just creates yet another engineering domain. Like, most people in the world are religious, and that fact creates like a whole, I don't know, religious equivalent of financialization designed to like exploit that fact. So, yeah. By the way, is this time still working for people, 8 a.m.? I know it's really late for you, Anuraj, and in the past when we brought up timing, you wanted to keep it at this instead of move it forward an hour, just doing like a pulse check.
Yeah, this is perfect for me. It's like just after coming from work, or so it's 6 o'clock for me, or it starts at 6 for me in the evening.
Would moving,
so
yeah.
sorry. So I'm on the East Coast. This is actually, it starts at 11 a.m. for me, which is fantastic because I tend to wake up around 9 or 10. So if it was actually 8 o'clock, I would not be showing up to this.
I could make a small pitch for moving it 1 hour later so that it's in alignment with Wednesday and Friday, but that's a very weakly held position. Now that I'm used to this.
I'm actually, I guess partly I like it early since it forces me to wake up early at least one day of the week. But honestly, yeah, I too would like it at 9 a.m. On the West Coast, this is brutal if you are not a morning person.
Especially this time of year with the light still slowly coming back.
Yeah, I don't mind. It's just a habit that I have now. So at 6 o'clock, but yeah, I don't mind. Like, just have to. It might take a couple of weeks to get used to it.
Okay, so if people don't mind, I will try to move it forward 1 hour, and maybe that'll get more West Coast people as well. And I don't think it makes a serious difference, except your Central European time, and I think it'll mainly affect people who are even further east. So, all right, so why don't we try making it 9 o'clock like the other things and see what that does? I don't even remember how we ended up on 8 a.m. initially, but let's try going back to 9 a.m. for a bit.
I think it
I
was
have one more
fitting
thing.
Gregory and some other people, and maybe some people in India too.
Okay. Then, yeah, Gregory would be most of the time. Yeah.
I have one more house management thing, which is I think I'm gonna make a pitch to try to get Yaks to hit the interested button in the Discord event to improve the visibility of how these events are working for our non-regular folks. And I'm happy I'll show that if people don't know what I mean. And also you can say, nobody wants to participate.
Is this something you have to do every week, or is there like an interested that you can do once for a recurring event? Because Discord seems to suck at handling this regular events.
If everybody goes and clicks on the events, what it currently says 5 events in the upper left of the sidebar, you'll at least see what I'm talking about. For now, yes, it would be you'd have to hit it every week. And back in the day when we had good bot folks, if Mayor ever renews his energy for bot writing, that would be a great bot. You could hit it once and set it. But I do think the granularity of 1 week isn't terrible, so that you can say, yeah, no, this week I'm coming. So if each week on the call,
I'm happy to try doing that for a few weeks and seeing if it works. Because I remember I've been skeptical of your housekeeping ideas before, but you've proved me wrong, at least in one case where the threads were initially really hard to do, but now we've been doing them systematically. And I think it's very useful in terms of organizing the archives. So yeah, I'm willing to give this a shot and see if it catches on. It seems easy enough.
And that with permission, then, like for the rest of the month, I'll do a quick nag on each call.
Yeah. Fine for this
nudge
call.
versus nag question. Okay. Cool.
All right. So see you guys next week, 1 hour later than usual. I'll make the change on the calendar and post it.
Great.
All right. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.